Okay, guys, so we're going to compare Irish composers here, and this is part of your junior cycle syllabus, and this is one of the learning outcomes. So, learning outcome 3.7 to be specific. So, we need to compare compositions by two or more Irish composers or songwriters use listening background, reading, and scores where appropriate to explain and describe differences and similarities in these compositions. So again, you have a wide range of options available to you, and as with everything we've done so far, please feel free to explore this yourself. It doesn't have to be. So the two composers I'm going to look at here, they don't have to be the two composers you use. There's nothing to say you can't go off and study two completely different composers or two different compositions. Um, so I would ask you, please, just if you are working independently of what I've done here, will you just run it by me before you plan on using it in any exam context to make sure that you have researched your own composers or songwriters properly. But you're perfectly free to go with mine as well, the ones that I'm choosing here. So there's what we have to do, or what we have to be able to do, and I will be working from the Sounds Good 2 book for some of this. There's also, guys, there's content from the Sounds Good 1, and for those of you who are my students watching in, you'll know that Sounds Good 1, we use a school batch of these books, so you won't have this book. We didn't actually ask you to buy this book. We've just used Sounds Good 2. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so I'm actually going to focus in on some female composers here. The first of which is Ina Boyle. I'm not going to read through this whole thing here because it is in your Sounds Good book, page 144 and 145 there. But Ina Boyle was an Irish composer, wrote many art songs. You can see the definition of an art song there. An art song is a vocal music composition, usually written for one voice with piano accompaniment. And we're going to look at a piece of music that Ina Boyle composed. It's an art song. So again, written for one voice with a piano accompaniment, and it's based on an ancient Gaelic text which was translated by Pádraig Pearse. Pádraig Pearse, who would have been a kind of a well-renowned Irish poet and was involved in the Easter Rising in 1916 and executed, I believe, and so on. I just want to be careful when I'm getting into history and stuff like that. I'm not a history teacher, so I don't kind of rely on my historical knowledge. So this piece of music we're talking about here is Sleep Song. So composed in 1923. We can have a listen to it here. I'm not going to play the actual composition in the video because these tutorials, I try to keep them as brief as possible. So I'm not going to actually play it here now, but I would encourage you to have a listen to it yourself, either by playing the CD that comes with your book. You can see it's Sleep Song by Ina Boyle, or moving along, you'll see later on here, you'll see there's a link to it later on this is it here in this presentation. So by all means, have a listen to it via the link itself. So you can download these links from mrmullinsmusicclass.com or you'll find them on YouTube. It's perfectly obvious. If you just type in Sleep Song by Ina Boyle, this will probably come up first of all, that link there. Okay, so she's the first the first composer that we're going to speak about. I have skipped by one slide here. My apologies. Okay. So Ina Boyle, who I've made reference to there, Irish composer. Emer Noon is the second composer we're going to look at. Emer Noon is probably just as famous for being a conductor, I guess, as she is for being a composer. But that's up to opinion. John Field, Sean O'Reilly, Mícheál Ó Súilleabháin, and Bill Whelan. So John Field would have written a lot of piano music. There is a room named after him in the National Concert Hall. No surprises for guessing that room is called the John Field Room. Sean O'Reilly, who is very famous for composing for example, the music to the film Misha Era. Mícheál Ó Súilleabháin, who passed away quite recently, by the way. I don't know what year you're watching this slide in. I'm making this presentation in 2022. He died, I think maybe about 3 years ago. He was, I think, the head of world music in the University of Limerick, but fine composer. And then Bill Whelan, who most famous, I suppose, for writing the music for Riverdance or composing the music to Riverdance, but really was quite a successful composer, I guess, before that happened. Okay, is probably, I would imagine, the most commercially successful composer of that list there. because Riverdance was such a kind of global phenomenon. So I mentioned Ina Boyle there. I'm going to move on. The second composer we're going to look at here is Emer Noon. This stuff here is taken from the Sounds Good 1 book. So just in case you're looking at page 76 of your Sounds Good 2 book and you're wondering why it doesn't match up, it's a different book, okay? So there you go. She's an Irish video game composer and conductor. Now resident in California. I believe she moved back to Ireland during COVID. But I wouldn't be quite sure. But she also she conducted the orchestra for the Oscar Awards there. I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So obviously very, very highly regarded conductor. There's plenty of footage of her online, Emer Noon, and I'm going to use a piece of music that Emer Noon composed and a piece of music that Ina Boyle composed. So I mentioned this in the last slide. We're going to look at an art song by Ina Boyle called The Sleep Song. And we're going to look at a piece by Emer Noon called Zelda's Lullaby, which is taken from The Legend of Zelda, which I believe is a computer game, but I'll have to take your word for this, okay? So I'm not going to play either of these pieces now because they take up too much time in the presentations. So please now pause and listen to them yourself. So we then have to decide what have both of these songs got in common. Now, how do we compare pieces of music? Where do we start? And I mean, normally when I ask this in class, like if I say, well, what have those two pieces got of music in common? I get these blank faces looking back at me because it can be hard to compare or to find the language to compare two pieces of music. So we're going to take note of our musical features here. So you kind of need to go back to first year to kind of revise these. There is a system for remembering features that I told you about before in class, and that is Dr. Smith, DRSMITH. The D is for dynamics, the R is for rhythm, the S is for structure, M is for melody, and so on. I'm not actually going to use that here because there seems to be quite a bit of confusion with that. So I'm just going to give you an example here of a few features of music. So dynamics, which is the musical term for volume. Rhythm, which is the pattern of the notes, how the notes are organized. It's in your crotchets and quavers and so on. Tempo, which is the speed. It's very easy to mix these two up, so be careful. Texture, so what's happening? How many layers are there to the song? So if there's a melody and nothing else, just one melody, and that's all you hear, it's monophonic. If you hear the melody and it's accompanied by chords, now those chords could be on a piano or a guitar, but equally it could be a combination of instruments from an orchestra coming together to play accompanying chords. So melody accompanied by chords is homophonic texture. If there are two melodies playing at the same time, that is what we call polyphonic texture. Next one, instrumentation. What instruments do you hear? Pretty obvious that. Tonality, is it major or minor? And then structure or form. So is there an A part, a B part, and so on? In the song, is that in common, or what sort of structure does the song have? I'm not going to get too big into structure or tonality in this comparison here, guys. So you've probably had a listen to those two pieces. I've gone a little bit ahead here. So for example, dynamics, we tend to talk about dynamics in wide or narrow ranges. So if the piece of music you listen to has a good range from, say, quiet to loud, or piano to forte, we would say that piece has a wide dynamic range. Whereas if it's more or less the same volume all the way through, we say it has a narrow dynamic range. So for example, Sleep Song had quite a narrow dynamic range, where I would say Zelda's Lullaby had a broader dynamic range. The rhythm, I suppose the rhythm in both was quite simple, quite sparse, and nothing too complicated there. The tempo in both pieces was quite slow. The texture was homophonic in both of them. We had a melody accompanied by chords. Now that's really obvious in the first one, in Sleep Song. It's not as obvious in the second one. You will also notice that there are parts of the second piece there, Zelda's Lullaby, where the instruments drop out and it's just the singing. That doesn't necessarily make the whole song monophonic. It just means there's a section over there that's monophonic, but the song itself is homophonic. Instrumentation. Now, there were big differences here. You heard in Sleep Song there was just a piano and voice. They were the only two instruments there. Whereas in Zelda's Lullaby we had a range of traditional Irish instruments. We had the string family and we had the voice. So there was a lot of instrumentation. There were a lot of instruments used. Tonality, you could argue this can be open to debate, okay? Just because something's in a major or a minor key doesn't necessarily make it major or minor tonality. But I would say the tonality, you could argue either they're minor in the first one, minor in the second one, but we'll stay away from that one. Structure or form, I'm not going to get into here now, okay? So you then need to go and make a Venn diagram, like you'll see in the book here. So this is just two circles, okay? In one circle, so we talk about, for example, the one on the left. Now, I haven't actually marked this, which I really should. This one here on the left is Sleep Song. So you put all the characteristics of Sleep Song in there. Now, I've just put one for the moment. So in terms of instrumentation, so the instrumentation for Sleep Song was very few instruments, okay? Whereas in Zelda's Lullaby, it had many instruments. So they're not interlapping. They are a difference between the two. So you put the differences in the song's own unique individual circle there. The cross section here in the middle is where things that are in common between the two pieces, such as slow tempo, will go. So there we've compared the two pieces using musical features. And that's it, guys. So I've put in some more stuff here. This is all in your Sounds Good 2 book as well, about other composers, John Fields, Mihailo Suleiman. And I have focused in on largely kind of classical composers or composers that use orchestra, but that doesn't mean you can't use singer-songwriters, rap artists, you name it. Okay, do whatever you like yourself. By all means, research it, but you can use mine if you're happy enough to do that. Okay, thanks, guys. Any questions? Get in touch.